Welcome to late-night horror stories and true crime. Tonight's tale takes us deep into the Appalachian Mountains, where two young couples on a hiking trip rent a remote cabin from a strange old man who lives just down the holler. What begins as a peaceful getaway slowly turns into something much darker, and not everyone will make it out alive. This is The Old Man, based on true regional legends and the kind of rural silence that hides secrets best left undisturbed. The cabin wasn't on any app we checked. Brian said he found it on a forum for underrated Appalachian hiking spots. Said it was a hidden gem. Remote, rustic, cheap. Red flags all around, sure, but we'd already rented the thing, and the money was non-refundable. We were two couples, me and Rachel, and our friends Brian and Layla. Brian and I had been tight since high school. Layla and Rachel met in college, so it was all pretty easy going between us. Or at least it had been. The drive into the mountains twisted higher and tighter than expected, with a cracked gravel road leading into a forest thick enough to swallow the sun. There were no other homes, no stores, no phone service. By the time we pulled into the small clearing, the cabin looked like it had grown from the land. Weathered grey boards, moss on the stone chimney, and a porch that leaned like it was tired of standing. That's where we met him. He was already there. Sitting in a rusted lawn chair, smoking a long pipe. I thought he might be asleep at first, until one eye opened. The other one looked cloudy and dead. "You must be Daniel," he said in a voice as cracked as the driveway. "And that must be Rachel. Pretty name." He stood, slower than I expected, tall and wiry in that way old folks get, like a dried-out scarecrow. Wore a brown coat even though it was warm, and I swear his boots left prints that looked older than the dirt. He introduced himself as Mr. Delvin said he'd owned the land a good long while. Then he handed us the key, an actual iron key, no smart lock, no keypad. "Cabin's all yours for the weekend," he said. "But if you need anything, I live just down the holler. Don't come down without calling, though." Brian asked how we'd call him without signal. He grinned. "You'll figure it out." We brought in our gear and gave ourselves the grand tour. A creaky living room with a fireplace, two upstairs bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a porch that faced the woods. There was something about the way the trees pressed up to the clearing that made me feel like they were leaning in, like the forest itself was eavesdropping. We joked about Deliverance and Blair Witch, cracked open beers, cooked some burgers, and got a fire going. That night, around 1 a.m., the power blinked out. We figured it was just the ancient wiring, but Rachel didn't like it. She hated the dark. We tried the flashlights. Mine worked, Brian's didn't. Then Layla pointed out the house phone on the wall. It had no cord. But the thing rang when we lifted the receiver. No dial tone. But when I said hello, I heard a voice. "Trouble with the lights?" It was Delvin. I hadn't even said anything yet. I stammered. "Yeah, it just went out. Did you already know?" "I heard it," he said, like that explained anything. "I'll be up in 5. I don't know what I expected, but 5 minutes later, headlights cut through the woods. His old truck pulled into the clearing, headlights dim and flickering. He stepped out with a flashlight and an oil lantern, which he handed me like a gift. "Power goes out sometimes," he said. "This place don't like too much light. I'll check the line out back." Rachel clutched my arm the entire time. He wandered into the dark, mumbling to himself. He returned 10 minutes later, said something had tripped, and just like that, the power came back. Before he left, he stood at the door a little too long, looking at each of us in turn. "You kids sleep light now," he said. Holler'll wake you if you don't." And then he was gone. The morning after the power outage, the cabin felt different. Still cold, still quiet. But something in the air had shifted. The trees outside looked closer than they had the day before, like they'd leaned in overnight just to listen. Rachel was the first one up. She told me she dreamt about the porch, said she was out there alone and the forest had whispered her name, not once, but 3 times. I joked about her being dramatic, but her eyes were too serious for teasing. She didn't respond, just stared out the window, like something was still calling her. We ate a quiet breakfast, packed our bags for the first hike, and tried to act like everything was normal. Brian had picked out a trail called Wolfe's Bend, one of those out-and-back loops that promised scenic overlooks and a waterfall. The trailhead was a half-mile past the clearing. There were no other cars, no signs of recent hikers, just a narrow dirt path disappearing into the trees. The hike started out fine. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, and for a while it felt like any other camping trip. Layla and Rachel walked ahead, taking photos and laughing about how haunted the cabin felt. Brian cracked open a beer and swore it tasted like ash. About 2 miles in, the trail thinned, the trees thickened, and that warm, friendly energy vanished. Rachel stopped first. "Did you hear that?" We all froze. I strained my ears, but heard nothing but the wind. "There," she whispered, pointing back down the trail. "Someone's following us." I turned, scanning the woods behind us. Nothing. But then Layla saw it too. Off to the right, deep between the trees, stood a figure. He didn't move. He didn't hide. He just stood there, tall, stiff, coat too long, one hand at his side, the other holding something like a stick or a walking staff. His head was slightly tilted, like he was observing a painting at a museum. Brian called out, "Hey, you good, man?" No answer. Then he was gone. Not walked away. Gone. Like the moment we blinked, the trees swallowed him whole. No one said a word after that. We turned back. The hike back to the cabin took half the time. None of us looked back again. When we got inside, we locked the doors and pulled the blinds shut. The silence felt oppressive. Even the birds had stopped making noise. That evening we tried to distract ourselves. Layla pulled out a card game. Brian turned on music from his phone, but there was no service. Just that same buffering screen over and over. Rachel stayed near the window, peeking out from time to time. I asked her what she was looking for. "I think he's out there," she whispered. Brian and I didn't want to admit we believed her, so we didn't say anything. Around 10:30, I stepped out onto the porch to smoke a cigarette. The air had gone bitter cold, the kind of cold that creeps into your bones and makes your skin feel wrong. And that's when I saw him. Just beyond the tree line, between 2 thick pines, stood Mr. Delvin, still as stone. He wasn't holding a lantern this time. He wasn't even pretending to be normal, just watching. His face didn't show curiosity or anger. It didn't show anything. I backed up slowly and stepped inside. "I saw him," I said, shutting the door. "Delvin, he's in the woods." Rachel paled. "I told you." Brian grabbed a flashlight. "Then let's go confront the old bastard." Layla tried to stop him. "What if he's dangerous?" "Then he better be ready." I followed Brian out, mostly because I didn't want him facing anything alone. We stepped into the clearing and scanned the woods, but the figure was gone. We walked to the edge of the trees. Nothing. But just before we turned to go back, we heard something behind us. A low crack, like a branch snapping under weight. Brian turned the light around, still nothing. But then, a flash of movement. Something slithered, yes, slithered deeper into the woods. I saw the long coat dragging across the leaves. "Back inside," I said. We didn't argue. Inside, Rachel and Layla were pale. The house phone had rung again. No one answered it. We unplugged it from the wall, even though there was no power cord to begin with. By the third day, the sense of unease was no longer subtle. It pressed against the cabin like weather. We didn't talk about hiking anymore. We barely talked at all. Rachel sat curled in one of the rocking chairs, wrapped in a blanket, eyes fixed on the window. Layla paced, glancing at the front door every few minutes as if she expected someone to knock. No one wanted to say it, but we all felt it. Something was coming. Brian tried to lighten the mood by frying up bacon and eggs. "Look," he said, trying to force a grin. "If we're all losing our minds, at least we're doing it with cholesterol." The food helped. Sort of. But then Layla pointed out something that stopped all of us cold. "The bacon," she said, holding the package. "It's new. Wasn't here yesterday. We only brought one pack." I checked the fridge. There were more eggs than we brought too, and a new stick of butter. It was like someone had restocked while we were out. "Maybe we forgot we brought extras," Brian offered weakly, already knowing how flimsy it sounded. We didn't eat much after that. By nightfall, a thick fog had rolled into the clearing. It wasn't just a visual thing, you could feel it, seeping under the windowsills, brushing against the floorboards. The trees were gone in the haze, replaced by vague, shifting shapes. Once or twice I thought I saw movement in the fog. Something just standing there, waiting. At 10:17 p.m., the knocking started. It was soft at first. 3 slow knocks, knock, 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 on the back wall of the cabin. We froze. Rachel turned toward me, whispering, "Was that?" Brian stood, flashlight in hand. "I'll check." "No," Layla said sharply. "Don't open anything." But he was already moving. We followed, huddled close. Brian swung open the back door. No one was there, just the thick fog pressing against the frame. Then the knocking came again, this time from the left side of the house. Same rhythm. 3 deliberate knocks. We ran to the window. Again, nothing, but we could hear breathing, close, heavy. Rachel backed into the living room, tears welling. "He's playing with us." I turned on every light I could find. It felt childish, but I didn't care. That's when the front door shook. Not knocked. Shook, like someone had gripped the knob and rattled it hard. The lantern on the shelf trembled. The floor groaned under the force of it. Brian shouted, "Who's out there?" No answer. I flung the door open. Still no one. But in the dirt just beyond the porch were boot prints. Large, heavy, leading in a straight line toward the door, and then just stopping. No turn. No retreat. As if whoever made them had vanished mid-step. Rachel grabbed my arm. "Danny, the phone." It was ringing again. This time I answered. I expected silence. Or maybe that horrible breathing again, but instead a voice I hadn't heard before whispered, "You left it open." Then the line went dead. "What did it say?" Brian asked. I turned and looked at the door. It was still open, swinging gently in the breeze. I closed it, locked it, bolted it. Rachel vomited in the sink. The rest of the night was spent huddled in the living room, with flashlights and the fireplace crackling low. Layla sat with her knees pulled up to her chest. Brian tried to stay awake, but nodded off sometime around 3 a.m. I stared at the window, at the trees, at the porch. And in the moment before I drifted off, I thought I saw someone walk past. Not fast. Not even sneaky. Just walking. Calmly. a long coat dragging behind them. I woke up to silence. No birds, no wind, not even the creak of the trees. Just that same unnatural stillness that had settled over the cabin like a fog you couldn't see, only feel. Rachel was still curled beside me on the couch. Brian sat upright in the recliner, flashlight in his lap, his eyes bloodshot. But Layla, where's Layla? I asked. Rachel stirred, sat up, looked around. Bathroom, maybe. Brian stood, stretched his legs, cracked his neck. She was right here. We searched the entire cabin, both bedrooms, bathroom, pantry, under the beds, even the crawl space. No Layla, no note. Her coat was still on the hook, her boots were still beside the door, but her phone, gone. We tried to call it, no signal, not even a hint of reception. She wouldn't have left without saying anything, Brian said, pacing. Not after last night. We stepped outside. The fog had finally lifted, but the sky was slate grey, sun smothered behind thick clouds. The woods didn't feel like nature anymore. They felt like a mouth waiting to close. We fanned out, calling her name again and again. Rachel stood near the edge of the tree line, arms crossed tight over her chest, staring into the gloom. She didn't even raise her voice, just whispered Layla's name over and over like a prayer. Brian stomped through the brush, shouting loud enough to scare the crows out of the trees. I walked the perimeter of the cabin. That's when I saw it. Bare footprints in the mud. Just beyond the back window, small prints, feminine. They led into the woods and stopped. Like all the others. No drag marks, no broken twigs, no Layla, just nothing. We searched for hours. The trail was gone before it began. Rachel wanted to call the police. Brian checked his phone again. No bars. Then I remembered the phone in the cabin. It hadn't rung all day, but it was still there, still on the wall, still disconnected. I picked it up. No tone. I said her name anyway. Layla, if you're out there. The line went dead quiet, then a click, then breathing, not just breath, but close, wet. Like someone standing right behind the mouthpiece, nose flaring. Then it stopped. Rachel was unraveling. She kept asking if this was a prank, a setup. If we were being watched for some online video, some social experiment. Brian shouted at her, told her to shut up, told her this wasn't the time. He punched the fridge door. I didn't blame him. Around dusk, Rachel came to me holding something. I found this in our room, she said, hands trembling. It was Layla's phone, cracked, mud-smeared. I turned it on. Somehow it worked, only one photo in the camera roll. It hadn't been there before. It was a picture of us, taken from behind the living room window. Rachel and I on the couch, Brian at the fireplace. It was time-stamped from that morning. Someone had been in the cabin. We armed ourselves with kitchen knives and the fire poker. It was all we had. At sunset, I stepped out on the porch to get air. I didn't want to, but the walls were closing in. That's when I saw him again. Mr. Delvin, standing in the clearing near the tree line, holding something in his arms. Cloth, fabric, maybe a shirt. He didn't move, just stared. I shouted, "Where is she?" But he didn't answer. He turned slowly and walked back into the woods. Not fast, not afraid. I started after him. Brian grabbed my shoulder. "Don't. He's got something of hers. You go in there, and you don't come back." I stopped, and he was gone again. That night, we barricaded the doors and windows. We moved furniture against the entryway. The cabin was darker than ever. Something about the lights felt wrong, like they were dimming on their own. At 3:33 a.m., the phone rang. Rachel answered. At first, she said nothing. Then her mouth dropped open and she pressed the phone to her chest. "What did it say?" I asked. She didn't answer, just shook her head. "Rachel." Her voice was barely audible. He said he's already inside. After the phone call, we didn't speak. Not for minutes. Not until we realized we'd barricaded the front door, but left the back wide open. I ran to it, slammed it shut, bolted the lock. Rachel stood in the hallway, still holding the phone like it might ring again. It didn't. We stayed awake until morning. Brian sat with his back to the fireplace, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, his eyes twitching toward every creak of the cabin. Rachel stayed close to me but flinched at every shadow. I was listening, really listening for any sound that would prove we weren't alone. But the silence was complete. When the first grey light bled through the window, we gathered what we could: bags, jackets, keys. Brian went to start the truck. I watched him from the window as he popped the hood. Then I saw his face drop. I stepped outside. "Wires are gone," he muttered. "Clean out. Like someone cut them and took the whole damn harness." Rachel broke down on the porch. I wanted to say something comforting, but I was too busy scanning the woods. They looked closer again. We made the decision in silence. There was nothing else to do. We had to walk down the gravel road, through the holler. Just follow the winding path and don't stop until we hit a town, or signal, or anything. Brian led the way with the fire poker in one hand and Rachel in the middle. I brought up the rear, lantern in hand. About a mile in, the woods got darker even though the sky was brightening. It was like the trees absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Rachel stumbled. "I think I hear something," she whispered. We stopped. I listened. A whisper, a faint voice, coming from deep in the woods, not far from the trail. It sounded like Layla. Brian spun toward it. "That's her." "No," I said quickly. "That's not her." "It is." He started toward the trees. I grabbed him. You think she's just out there calling to us like this is a fairy tale?" He froze. Tears welled in his eyes. I just want her back." "I know," I said, "but if you go in there, you don't come out." We kept moving. Another mile. Then another. That's when we saw it. A cabin. Not the cabin. This one was smaller, squatter, built into the earth like something hiding. The roof was caved slightly, moss crawling over every inch. And it reeked. Like rot. And sulfur, and iron. Delvin's place. We approached slowly, no sounds, no movement, but the door was ajar. Inside was worse than I imagined. No furniture, no lights, just dirt floors and photos covering every inch of wall space. Photos of people, old people, couples, children. Some photos were black and white, others faded Polaroids. Most were taken from a distance, through windows, from behind trees. Some of them were photos of us. Us on the porch. Us by the fire. Rachel brushing her teeth. Me tying my boots. But the worst ones? Layla. There were at least 6 shots of her walking alone. One of her crying, one of her sleeping. And then, one with her eyes open, but she wasn't looking at the camera. She was seeing through it. Like the thing behind the lens was her now. Rachel screamed. I turned and she was staring at something in the corner of the shack. A mound. A pile of dirt and fabric. We didn't stay to examine it. We ran. Back to the road, hearts hammering. But Rachel fell behind. I turned to call her. She was only a few steps back. Then she stopped. Her head tilted slightly. "Rachel!" I called. She looked at me, smiled faintly and said, "He's here." And then she walked straight into the woods. No hesitation, no fear. "Rachel!" I shouted. Brian tried to grab her, but she was gone. I chased, screaming her name. But the woods swallowed her completely. No sound. No sign. She just vanished. I don't know how long Brian and I stood there. Hours, maybe. He kept asking if this was hell. If we were dead already. I didn't answer. I just listened. Eventually, We staggered back to the original cabin. Not because we wanted to, because we had nowhere else to go. The truck still sat useless in the drive. The power was out again. The firewood was soaked. The lantern was low. Brian sat in silence for the rest of the night. I couldn't sleep. The house phone rang. I stared at it. It rang again, then a third time. This time I picked it up. Delvin's voice was calm, gentle even. "You left the door open again, son?" I turned toward the front door. The bolt had been undone. Brian was gone. Now it's just me. I've moved the table against the door, lit every candle I could find, and placed the fire poker across my lap. I know I should run. I know I should try again. But I can feel it now. Whatever Delvin is, whatever's in these woods, it doesn't let you leave. Thank you for joining us tonight for The Old Man. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss a night of terror. Have you ever rented a cabin in the woods and felt like you were being watched? Share your stories in the comments. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never answer the phone in a place that doesn't have power.